Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
That looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
For something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. Dr. Harold Koenig is an internationally renowned psychiatrist who is the founder and serves as the director of the Duke University Center for the Study of Religion, Spirituality, and Health. His research has produced documented evidence of the positive impacts of faith on both physical and mental ailments, findings that are leading to changes in the way that doctors, nurses, and therapists relate to their patients. In this week's edition of Challenge 2.0, we explore the healing power of connection through faith. So we'd like to welcome in this program Dr. Harold Koenig, who is a psychiatrist and also the founder and the director of the Duke University Center for the Study of Religion, Spirituality, and Health. Dr. Koenig, first of all, I know you've got a very busy schedule. Thank you so much for joining us in this program.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, Dr. Koenig, there's, of course, a lot of interest on health and things that we can do to affect our own health. We hear about things such as exercise and a proper diet, even meditation. Religion is something that I suspect is a little bit underappreciated. Is that your impression? And what have you seen in your years of research?
Yeah, I think that many underestimate the power that religious faith has in terms of our health,
Mhm.
because it affects every aspect of our health, our physical health, our emotional health, our ability to cope with, the difficult life challenges that we face, our relationships with others, our family. It affects all of those things. And so many people don't realize the breadth and the scope that faith has on a person's health.
Now, I think it was 2 years ago that you were ranked the number one authority in the world in terms of the interconnection between religion, spirituality, and health. And I guess I'd like to go back a little bit and ask you what initiated your interest in this field? Was it pre-existing commitment to your faith life and then it applied to medicine, or did it extend much earlier than that?
Well, you depart away from your religious roots when you go to college
Yeah.
and you're in medical school, and you're trying to survive in your profession. And that happened to me as well.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things, though, that I was very impressed by is that when I talked to my patients about how they were dealing with and coping with the difficulties of being sick and ill and in the hospital, and they would talk about their religious faith. And so I thought, wow, that's interesting. We hadn't been told that in medical school that faith was an important part of people's lives that
Hmm.
enabled them to get through many of the physical health conditions that were disabling them and threatening to take their life. So that is when I started to do research, because I wanted to document this in a systematic way that at least patients themselves were reporting that this made a big difference in their life. And
Hmm.
then ultimately, I would go on to measure religious involvement and see how it was correlated with the person's mental health, social health, physical health,
Hmm.
and and their different behaviors. So that's kind of how it got started. And 40 years later now, here we are.
It's funny how time evolves. Has your approach changed over those 40 years at all in terms of how you approach the patients or what you're looking at?
Not really. You know, Pretty much from the start, I realized that this was making a big impact and that I needed to be able to, address this when I talk with patients.
Hmm.
And I take, a spiritual history and learn about the person's faith and how it relates to their health. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's not for everyone, but for a good proportion of people, particularly when they get sick, it is an important factor.
Why don't we begin by looking at the linkage between faith life, spirituality, spiritual life, and their mental emotional health? Uh, what have you found there in terms of the linkage, and how strong is the evidence?
Well, religious beliefs help people to cope with the
Hmm.
stress, the stress that we're under from, disappointments, loss, change, trauma. It's all over the place. It's affecting us every day. And how do people cope with it? How do they make sense of it? How do they retain their sense of purpose and meaning in life?
Hmm.
And the way they do, many people, the way they do that is through their religious faith. So, um, and because of that, because it helps many people to cope better, it's related to less depression. People are less likely to become overwhelmed by
Hmm.
the stressors in their life and develop depression. They're less likely to become anxious. They experience more of a sense of peace and hope in terms of, the things that they have to endure, that there are good things that are ahead for them.
Hmm.
That's what religious faith gives them. It gives them this sense that there is good things ahead. And that is what generates the hope and the optimism that then consequently, affects other aspects of their health as well.
Hmm. Are there any particular, in this particular area of emotional health, mental health, are there any particular, and obviously I recognize there's patient confidentiality, but are there any personal stories that you really carry with you and when you start to talk about that, that sort of pop into your mind?
Yes, I had a patient who was suffering from chronic pain, severe chronic pain, and he was a young person. He had been injured on the job,
Hmm.
and he had had a back surgery, and then consequently, he'd left with this severe chronic pain. Nothing relieved it. Nothing
Hmm.
relieved it. Narcotics. This was a this was a narcotic resistant kind of pain that no matter what he took, he had to live with this, day
Right.
and night. It interfered with his sleep, made him irritable, affected his relationships, and he was really pretty much ready to end his life.
Hmm.
And there was only one thing that was standing between him and ending his life. And he told me this repeatedly, and that was his religious faith.
Hmm.
His religious faith was the one thing that enabled him to endure this chronic pain day after day.
We hear so much these days about dementia and Alzheimer's. Have you looked at those conditions relative to the impact of participation in a religion or in a faith community?
Well, our research group has not looked at this directly, but I have many students as well as colleagues who have studied this relationship. And it
Hmm.
appears that those who have a strong religious faith experience a slower loss of cognitive functioning as they grow older. They retain their memory longer. And even for those who have dementia, for example, Alzheimer's disease, the
Hmm.
progression of the Alzheimer's disease is slower among those
Wow.
who have a strong prayer life and who are connected, with God or the transcendent, however you whatever you call the transcendent. So it can really make a difference in terms of cognitive aging and in terms of progression of even dementia. And there's actually physiological reasons why that is the case. It has to do with because people are coping better, the stress hormones are lower in the body, and they're less likely to cause damage to the brain in those memory areas of the brain that stress causes and depression causes. So they are able to then retain their the functioning of their brain longer
Hmm.
into later life.
How do you see the connection between having an active faith life and, say, various physical ailments, be it heart disease, cancer, things of that sort?
Yes, because religious faith affects a person's social relationships,
Hmm.
their behaviors. Religious people don't drink, smoke as much. They live healthier lifestyles. And because they have a positive worldview, stronger families, all of this, the consequences, there are physical consequences to this. We know that our attitudes and behaviors throughout our lifetime influence our physical health in various ways, affects our immune functioning,
Hmm.
our cardiovascular system, our our all different the major healing systems in the body. We know that psychological, social, and behavioral factors influence those major healing systems.
Hmm.
And consequently, because religious faith gives a person an optimistic life view, gives a person hope, strengthens their relationships, um, keeps them from doing things they shouldn't be doing, all of that has physical consequences. And the result is that those who are engaged in religious faith live on average. It depends on whether you're a minority or whether you're like a Caucasian. But
Hmm.
for a Caucasian, a white person, the difference in lifespan is about 7 years. So a person will live 7 years longer on average
Hmm.
if they are engaged within a religious faith and a religious community. And if you're a minority, if you're African American, for example, the difference in longevity is 14 years. And national this is based on national studies of the US population. So it can make a considerable difference in terms of your longevity. Longevity is a good measure because it's kind of assesses the cumulative effect on physical health that
Hmm.
various behaviors and attitudes have. Now, what else do we want? Is there anything more than a long and happy life?
You have published so widely, to give a scope of that, but in the papers that you've done and in the papers that you've reviewed and read yourself, has this been documented in terms of some of the imaging technology, in terms of health conditions, in this particular group of patients?
There was a study look from Columbia University looking at structural MRI scans,
Hmm.
magnetic resonance imaging scans of the brain, showing that individuals for whom religion was very important, that actually the size of their cerebral cortex was significantly larger by 1 millimeter in certain areas of the brain, of the cerebral cortex, was larger compared to those who indicated that religion was not very important. Again, suggesting that because religion helps people to cope better,
Hmm.
reduces the risk of depression, which increases serum cortisol, which causes brain shrinkage, all of it makes perfect sense why this would be the case.
Interesting.
So, that's some real documentation that religious faith can make a difference. At least in your brain, it can make a difference. And that's a pretty important part.
Very important. Question for you then is, as you've conducted these studies, uh, has this largely focused on people who are involved in the Christian faith, or have you also examined people uh, who practice Judaism, Islam, other of the major faiths as well?
Yes, it appears that those who have a devout religious faith,
Hmm.
those with the devout, it's more about devoutness than it is about the particular faith. Those with the devout religious faith
Hmm.
seem to be healthier, seem to be healthier in all of I talked about earlier. Although, like I said, most of the research is in Christian populations. There are a lot of devout believers in other countries in the world, particularly the Muslim countries.
Yes.
The relationships there are very similar to those that we see in Christians.
Hmm. When you think of somebody's participation in a faith, participation in a group observance of that faith, you might tend to think, well, this is because of social cohesion, it's the social support group. Is that largely responsible for the impact, or have you found that it goes beyond that?
Well, we've actually looked at that. We've looked at that, and so have other investigators. My colleagues at Harvard, in particular, have looked
Hmm.
at that role that the social aspects play. It explains about 15 to 25%. So it is important. It's
Hmm.
important, but it's really only a small percentage when you consider, that 75 to 85% of it's due to other things other than the social interaction. And I think a lot of it has to do with the beliefs, the cognitive effects, and the effects on behavior.
Hmm.
Again, religious people don't smoke as much, don't drink as much. They're just behaving in a way that's healthier, and so it affects their health, both their emotional as well as their physical health.
There might be, doctor, a flip side to that, and that is a person might ask, if I'm sick, is that because I am not sufficiently engaged in faith, or is it some sort of negative judgment on me? How would you respond to people that ask that? Have you ever been asked that before?
Oh yes, many, many times, and this is a common belief within many religions, actually. Um, the thing is that I don't think people appreciate the many causes of illness.
Hmm.
There are many things that influence whether or not we get sick. Our genetics have an enormous impact. What we inherit from our
Hmm.
our parents, what we've experienced as a child, how we were raised, and how much love we received during our early years as infants and small children. All of that, and as we grow older, our bodies are going to give out. So there are many different things that feed into how healthy we are. And
Hmm.
many people don't actually come to a deep religious faith until they become sick. Because when you're healthy and everything's going well for you, who needs religion? It's
Yeah.
when everything else fails on you, then you turn to God. I mean, that's what people do. So you can never reverse that association, say, well, he's sick, and that's because he doesn't have enough faith. That's that's just incorrect from a scientific standpoint. It's incorrect.
The other aspect of that might be, let's say, we know that the most rapidly growing proportion of people, if you look at what their faith orientation is what has been described as the nuns. And I'm not speaking of female religious, rather the NONES,
Yeah.
uh, that have either had a negative experience with faith or with a faith community. And so I guess for those that have been estranged from religious faith, the question might be, okay, right now I'm not at a place where I'm feeling comfortable to get involved in a faith community or with religion. But is there a way of accessing these benefits? And I believe you've looked into that, haven't you?
Yes, I've written a book called Spiritual Readiness, um, a guide for the non-believer. And it's a book that takes the perspective of the non-believer and helps, guides and directs them on how to uh, obtain some of the benefits that people of faith
Hmm.
seem to derive from their religion. And so um, it's all about doing the things that religious people do. Loving your neighbor as yourself, treating others well, forgiving others, um, living a healthy life, not drinking and smoking. the only challenge there is this is tough to do on your own.
Some
It's
days more than others. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're carrying the whole load of this all on your own, and some people, really are there. But to the extent that you can do this, you can derive many of the same health benefits that people of religious faith
Mhm.
obtain from their faith. But I would encourage people to, who are not ready yet for a religious community or even believe in God, to keep an open mind. Keep an
Mhm.
open mind. Don't shut the door. That's just that's just not very wise to shut a door that 80% of the population of the world seems to be deriving a lot of benefit from. Don't shut the door. Keep the door open and look about you and see, uh, look at the universe around you, nature, everything, just how incredible the
Mhm.
universe, nature, the world is. And it's made a big difference in how I relate to patients. You know, I have, I have to say I've been affected personally by all of this research that, and the
Mhm.
people, mainly by the patients I've talked to about this. My life hasn't been that easy either. I certainly, have not gone through many of the things that many people who are listening have gone through. My relationship, my family, all of it has improved substantially since I've really started to take this seriously. So, it is kind of infectious, when you hear other people talk about it, people who are really in difficult circumstances, and they seem to be doing pretty well. You figure, well, what the heck, maybe I ought to give this a try. So I did, and I think it really did make a difference.
Given your experience, and you said you've been doing this for 40 years, have you started to notice more receptivity on the part of other health professionals, be it other physicians, nurses, or therapists?
Yes, I have. I've seen a growing receptivity. There's still a lot of resistance. But with the publication of the third edition of the Handbook of Religion and Health
Hmm.
earlier this year, this just brings so much research from some of the best institutions, academic institutions in the world. It brings it all together and shows actually the impact that religious faith has. So, of late, there haven't been many critics of this research simply because the research has been done so well, that statistically, methodologically, scientifically, that it's hard to criticize it. Mostly,
Right.
it's just been ignored by healthcare professionals because
Hmm.
they're so busy. They feel like they've got so many responsibilities. They're just trying to survive, and having to address spiritual issues is yet
Yeah.
one more thing on their plate. And they would just as soon, avoid it if possible. But I would say many are starting to address this issue in patient care because after a while they begin to see the difference that it makes in patients' lives.
Hmm. Is there, as we conclude our conversation, is there a suggestion or recommendation that you would have for somebody that is going in to see their doctor or other health professional, and this is important to them, a way that they can broach this to make that part of the healthcare plan?
It's tough. You don't want to offend your doctor, right?
Yeah.
Because they're making decisions for your life. They're prescribing medications that they only can do. And so you want to keep that relationship good with them. Part of it has to do with choosing a physician that's going to respect your religious faith. And
Hmm.
you may not have any option in that regard. And if you don't, then you just maybe, have to mention in a kind of a gentle way, my religious faith is very important to me. And I'm hoping that, that the treatment that you provide are going to be, is going to be consistent with that faith. So you can do it in kind of a humble, kind way,
Hmm.
letting the doctor know that, and hopefully they will respect and honor your faith. Or you could look for a physician that's addressing issues like this in their patient care, which largely consists of taking a spiritual history, learning from the patient what role their faith plays, if any, and then supporting whatever beliefs that the patient has in that regard, because it is helpful to them in coping.
Well, this has been a very rich conversation, and I know that you're working on some very exciting new areas of research at the Duke Center. And so I hope at some point in the future that maybe we can talk about that as well. But I thank you so much for your time and wish you all the best in your research and your personal life as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
And to all of you watching or listening to this episode of Challenge 2.0, thank you for tuning in and hope you'll join us for next week's episode. If you've enjoyed this program, found the conversations informative, interesting, and thought-provoking, and the visions of people from different backgrounds, faiths, or wisdom traditions inspiring, people who can disagree without being disagreeable and respect the essential human dignity of all, perhaps consider supporting our organization with a contribution. Your donation will not only support this program, but also the broader work of our nonprofit charitable organization, Paths to Understanding. Thank you.